Good afternoon. Today we shall be discussing John Keats' sonnet Bright Star. Bright star, which is variously known as Bright Star, would I were steadfast as thou art, which is the first line of the sonnet in many anthologies, is probably the most famous sonnet written by the Romantic poet John Keats. Keats wrote it originally in 1819, although he revised it a year later. When he wrote The Bright Star, Keats knew that he was dying from tuberculosis, and the poem is in part about his intense awareness that he will die young. Some critics have theorized that this poem was addressed to his fiancée, Fanny Brown, and even connect this sonnet to a letter that Keats wrote to Fanny Brown dated 3rd May 1818. Now, to attempt a paraphrase of this sonnet in order to understand what Keats was actually wanting to say, Keats in this sonnet addresses directly to a bright star in the night sky by saying in the first person, I wish I were as durable and as fixed as you are, not because you are alone up there in the sky and constantly watching the seas wash around the shores of the earth, or the annual cycle of the snow falling on the earth with your eyes constantly open, like a religious hermit with insomnia. No, I don't want to be unchanging and immortal like you and be up there on my own. I want to be as unchanging as you are, but down here with my head resting upon my young beloved's breast. Then I could feel the rise and fall of her as she breathes forever. I could always awake and it would be sweet. I could always hear her breathing and live forever. Or, if all this is not possible, then let me die, because it's not worth living if I can't do that. So, this essentially is the bare paraphrase of the sonnet. In the first line of the sonnet, the poet expresses his desire for an ideal, and the ideal is to be as steadfast as a star. An ideal which ironically cannot be achieved by a human being in this world, because this is a world of flux and change. Keats unfortunately and sadly realizes this at the end of the poem. In fact, he is unable to identify even briefly with the star, because immediately in line 2 he asserts a negative not, NOT, and lines 2 to 8 reject qualities of the star's steadfastness. Even the religious imagery is associated with coldness and an intense sense of loneliness. Moreover, the star is cut off from the beauties of nature on earth. Once the poet eliminates the non-human qualities of the star, he is left with just the quality of steadfastness. He can now define steadfastness in terms of human life on earth as the world of love and movement. As in so many poems, Keats here is grappling with the paradox of the desire for permanence and a world of timelessness and eternity implied by the star, while living in a time and a world which is conditioned by flux. The paradox is dissolved at the end of the poem, which is what? Which is joy and fulfillment are to be found here and now. He needs no more. There is a possible ambiguity in the last line. Is Keats saying that even if love doesn't enable him to live forever, he will die content in ecstasy and love? It is this sense of ambiguity which is highlighted in these lines, and that runs as an undercurrent throughout the poem. Initially, when we think about the sonnet's closing sestet, that is the last 6 lines of the sonnet, we are mindful that it teeters almost on the brink of a logical absurdity. What is the point, for example, of living forever to hear Fanny Brown, who might have been the likely inspiration for the sonnet, breathing if Keats's beloved is still going to die? But to a man in his early 20s and intensely aware that he is unlikely to make it into his late 20s, or even maybe a couple of years later, that would doubtless be the least of his worries. Technically, Bright Star is an English or a Shakespearean sonnet, and it carries the rhyme scheme AB AB, CD CD, EF EF, G G. But there is an interesting aspect in this sonnet. There are two voltas or turns. One volta, the first one, occurs at the beginning of the ninth line, when Keats turns from a consideration of the star's distance from Earth to a longing for durability. And then again, the second one, in that final line marked by the caesura and the dash, when Keats decides that if his wish to possess the star's steadfastness cannot be granted, he may as well die now. Despite its opening line and common short title, Bright Star, the sonnet is really a poem about human intimacy and a deep longing for human relationships. Even when considering the star's distance from us, Keats sees this in decidedly human terms. The earth, for example, he says, has human shores, while the snow on the mountains and moors forms a mask that is something that resembles a human face. As with so much of Keats's poetry, this is a poem about the physicality of being with someone or desiring to be with them, because Keats's poetry is obsessed with bodies, blushing, the sensuous, and the sensual. Nevertheless, as readers, we cannot miss the undercurrent of sadness that is tinged throughout the poem. And in fact, the obvious confusion in terms of logic that occurs in the poem is a confusion that occurs as a result of an intense and a tragic awareness of the impermanence of time and a possibility of a very sudden death.